A flight attendant hit a 5-year-old child without knowing who his mother was. Hi everyone, enjoy the quiet moments as you watch Alice sat with her young daughter, Lily. Dressed quite modestly, they clearly did not look like typical business class passengers. This fact did not escape Victoria's attention. A young flight attendant with a tenacious gaze. Probably just some lucky people who won tickets on some promotion. Victoria whispered to her co-worker Adam as she passed Alice's seat. Adam frowned but said nothing. The flight started without incident, but soon the atmosphere in business class changed. Lily accidentally spilled juice on a folding table. Victoria approached. Her expression spoke of obvious irritation. "This is simply unacceptable. Please watch your child," she said coldly. Alice hurriedly apologized, pulling out napkins to wipe the table. "I'm sorry, she didn't mean to. The mother tried to smooth things over." But Victoria wasn't going to stop. She crossed her arms and glared at Lily. "You have to teach your daughter how to behave. This is business class, not a playroom." Several passengers turned around, their displeasure felt in the air. Lily's cheeks flared, and she muttered quietly, "I'm sorry." Alice remained calm. "We'll be more careful." "Thank you," she said in an even tone. "I hope so," Victoria replied sharply, walking away and casting a dismissive glance over her shoulder. The tension eased a little, but not for long. After a while, Lily hesitantly tugged on Victoria's sleeve as she walked by. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," the girl whispered. Victoria turned around, her eyes flashing with irritation. "Don't touch me," she threw sharply. But Lily continued to stare at her with her innocent eyes, her small hand still lightly gripping the fabric of Victoria's uniform. Suddenly, Victoria lost control. Slap! A loud slapping sound broke the silence of the business class. Lily jerked back to Alice, pressing her palm against her flushed cheek, tears streaming down her cheek. Alice immediately hugged her daughter. Her eyes glittered with rage, but she held back. There was a sepulchral silence in the cabin. The passengers were shocked. Some began to whisper. "Victoria, what are you doing?" Adam asked sternly. His voice was even, but there was a look of bewilderment in it. Victoria realized she had crossed the line, but refused to apologize. She lifted her chin, trying to look confident. "I just taught her a lesson. That kid is completely uneducated, and his mother doesn't teach him anything." An elderly passenger, Mr. Harper, rose from his seat. "What makes you think you have the right to hit a child? This is totally unacceptable." Other passengers spoke up, creating a wave of outrage. "She should be punished," a woman named Margaret declared loudly. Victoria snorted. "You don't know the whole story, so don't judge. And you're not my boss." Mr. Harper wasn't about to back down. "Do you realize you're in the workplace, and not in your own home? If you are incapable of behaving professionally, you don't belong in this position." Adam gently tugged Victoria's arm. "Victoria, that's enough. Let me handle this." But Victoria pulled her hand away. "They don't belong here. Their tickets were probably through a raffle or some charity event." Alice was silent, her gaze confident and unwavering. Another flight attendant, Isabella, approached her. She bowed anxiously and said quietly, "I'm very sorry for what happened." "It's all right," Alice replied softly but firmly, reassuring Lily. "My daughter will be fine." Victoria looked angrily at Isabella. "You're also apologizing to them. It's not my fault." Adam sighed heavily and took Victoria aside. "If you don't stop, we're going to have to report this to the department." Victoria walked away, but the judgmental looks of the passengers haunted her. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew she had gone too far, but her pride wouldn't let her admit it. Meanwhile, Alice concentrated on comforting Lily. "It's all right, dear," she whispered, but her gaze slid around the cabin, scrutinizing every detail. No one in business class could have imagined that this was just the beginning. Victoria took a quick step toward the back of the plane, well aware of the judgmental stares drilling behind her. Deep down, she knew she'd crossed the line, but her temper wouldn't let her admit guilt. Tossing her hair back, she tried to look confident, though her palms were sweating. Adam caught up with her. "What were you thinking?" "I don't need a lecture, Adam." Victoria brushed off irritably, but her gaze involuntarily darted to the row where Alice and Lily sat. "Those two don't deserve to be here. They ruin the atmosphere for those who do deserve it." Adam sighed heavily. "They're just as much passengers, Victoria, And more importantly, you had no right to hit the child. Do you realize what you've done? You think I'm afraid? Victoria snorted, but her voice no longer sounded so confident. I know the leadership. I have connections. A couple of complaints won't change anything. Adam stared at her for a long moment, saying nothing. He knew Victoria well, arrogant, spoiled, used to evading responsibility. But this time the situation was different. These passengers weren't going to just forget what had happened. Meanwhile, Alice sat quietly, hugging Lily. The little girl pressed into her shoulder, her cheek still burning from the impact. The woman across the hall, Mrs. Blake, couldn't stay silent any longer. She leaned over to Alice, her eyes expressing sympathy. I'm truly sorry this happened. That stewardess had no right to do that. Mr. Harper's voice came from the rows. Are you going to file a complaint? This shouldn't go without consequences. Alice nodded. I'll deal with it, but right now my priority is my daughter. Harper smiled. Know that you have our support. You are not alone. The impending danger didn't come from anyone else, but from herself. Adam and Isabella stood in the corner talking. We can't let this go on, Adam said in a quiet tone. If we don't do something, the airline will be in serious trouble. Exactly, Isabella agreed. But Victoria is so stubborn. I doubt she'll admit she's guilty. We don't have a choice, Adam said, looking toward the end of the cabin where Victoria stood. We need to talk to her now. In the middle of the salon, Mr. Harper approached Alice. Ma'am, he said softly, I hope you don't feel alone in this situation. Many of us witnessed what happened, and we're here to support you if you need it. Alice looked up and smiled faintly. Thank you. It means a lot to me. Harper nodded, his gaze settling on Lily. She's very brave. What happened shouldn't have happened. I'm truly sorry you and your daughter had to go through that, Harper said. Lily looked up. Her eyes were still red. She whispered, I didn't mean to make her angry. My dear, it's not your fault, Alice reassured her. Her voice was soft but firm. You've done nothing wrong. No one has the right to treat you like this. Do you understand? Lily nodded, her fear slowly fading away. Harper squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. His voice was full of sympathy. I believe you'll work it out. But if you need help, we're here. In the back of the cabin, Adam and Isabella approached Victoria. Both had stern expressions on their faces. Victoria, we need to talk, Adam began. What happened earlier has crossed all boundaries. You need to reflect on your actions. Victoria turned around sharply, her face expressing irritation. You and your lectures again? Listen to me, Adam emphasized. Your actions don't just affect you, they affect the entire team and the airline. Do you have any idea what the passengers are saying? They're going to file complaints. And this time, it's not going to be that easy. Let them try, Victoria said defiantly. I don't care. Isabella intervened, her voice calm but firm. Victoria, we don't take the passengers' side. But what you have done cannot be justified. If you continue like this, even we won't be able to help you. Victoria stared at Isabella, her lips pressed tightly together. Isabella's words hurt her, but Victoria tried to keep her composure. You're making a big deal out of this. It was just a little misunderstanding. A little misunderstanding? Adam almost couldn't believe his ears. You slapped a child in front of everyone, Victoria. If that's small, I don't know what's big. Without waiting for Victoria's response, Isabella shook her head and walked away. She didn't want to waste any more words, knowing that Victoria's anger was just a way of defending herself. Adam sighed heavily. His face expressed disappointment. Meanwhile, Lily had stopped crying, although her face still showed signs of fear. A young female passenger named Rose, sitting across the aisle, hesitantly approached. Excuse me, can I help you? Rosa asked. Her eyes were full of concern as she looked at Alice. No need, Alice replied politely, but thank you for your kindness. You really are strong, Rose said with a small smile. If I were you, I don't think I could stay as calm as you are. Alice met Rose's gaze. Her eyes expressed gratitude. Sometimes staying calm is the only way to protect my daughter. Rose nodded. We're all on your side. Her words were a quiet affirmation that warmed the tense atmosphere. Several other passengers began to nod in support, expressing their solidarity through silent gestures and encouraging glances. Victoria could feel the pressure building. More and more passengers were supporting Alice. She looked at her watch again, silently hoping the flight would end sooner. But the growing anxiety inside her did not subside. From afar, Alice watched Victoria. Her gaze was calm but filled with a frightening inner strength. No one could guess what Alice was thinking, but it was clear that she had no intention of just letting it go. The uneasy feeling fell over Alice, rolling in again. Alice said nothing, but her silent determination frightened Victoria far more than any loud complaint. At the front of the parlor, Alice sat next to Lily. Her eyes never took their eyes off Victoria. Alice didn't need to say much. Her gaze said it all. It was a silent but powerful message. I won't let it go. Lily stopped crying but held tightly to her mother, as if she was afraid Victoria would come near again. It's going to be okay, dear. You don't have to be afraid, Alice said gently. But she hates me, Lily whispered, her eyes full of confusion and fear. No one has the right to hate you just for who you are, Alice replied firmly. In another corner, Adam and Isabella were talking quietly, their tones tense. We have to do something, Isabella said, glancing at Victoria. Otherwise, this is only going to get worse. Adam shook his head. She's not listening. I've tried to talk to Victoria, but she's too stubborn. Then we need to report this to the chief flight attendant, Isabella insisted. This situation cannot continue. If the passengers made a formal complaint, it could affect the airline's reputation. Adam was silent for a moment before nodding. Okay, I'll talk to the manager. Isabella exhaled deeply, but her expression remained anxious. Hopefully this wouldn't go too far. Meanwhile, in the passenger area, a group of people gathered around Alice. Lewis, an older man, stood up, looked around, and spoke, loud enough for everyone to hear. What happened is unacceptable. I think we all agree that the stewardess should be held accountable. That's right. Rosa, a young woman, interjected. Alice and her daughter didn't deserve to be treated like this. This is a VIP cabin, and we expect professionalism, not this kind of behavior. Several other passengers nodded in agreement. I totally agree, added Teresa, an older woman sitting nearby. If necessary, we should file a collective complaint. Alice looked around, her expression filled with gratitude. Thank you all. I sincerely appreciate your support. Lewis put a hand on her shoulder in a show of support. We're not just here for you, we're here for what's right. This kind of behavior must be punished. Toward the end of the cabin, Victoria began to sense the growing discontent of the passengers. She tried to act indifferent, to ignore the panic and judgmental looks directed at her. Victoria's pride was hurt, but her arrogance prevented her from admitting her guilt. Who are they to tell me what to do? Victoria muttered through gritted teeth, clenching her fists. I don't need their guidance. But deep inside, Victoria knew that this time it wasn't as simple as before. Her connections had been able to protect her in the past, but would they always be able to protect her? Alice sat still, her gaze fixed on Victoria, but her silence carried an invisible weight that only added to the flight attendant's anxiety. Lily quietly tugged at her mother's sleeve, her small voice barely audible. Mum, I want to go home. Alice leaned over and kissed her daughter on the forehead. I know you do, sweetie. We'll be home soon. Nearby, Rosa was watching and said quietly to Teresa, She's so strong. I don't think I could stay so calm if I were her. You're right, Teresa replied. But it's that calmness that's the most frightening. That stewardess must be worried. Victoria walked quickly toward the service station, trying to avoid the gazes of the passengers. But the more she tried to ignore them, the more she felt overwhelmed. Every whisper, every glance, felt like needles piercing her confidence. Adam had returned. His gaze was stern as he looked at Victoria. Victoria, I've reported the situation to the senior flight attendant. They'll look into it. Victoria flinched and turned sharply. You did what? I had no choice, Adam replied coldly. If you refuse to apologize, I had to take action. Isabella stepped forward, adding, This isn't personal, Victoria. This is about our responsibility to our passengers. Victoria pressed her lips together, her eyes flashing with anger. But this time she said nothing. The ground beneath her feet seemed to begin to crumble. Alice watched Victoria from a distance. Her gaze was calm, but full of unspoken determination. Lily had fallen asleep in her mother's arms, but Alice showed no signs of fatigue. Her eyes glittered with determination, as if she had made an important decision. There was a heavy silence in the VIP cabin. But it was not peaceful. It was the silence before the storm. Everyone could feel it, and Victoria knew there would be no way out this time. The tension remained palpable, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. The whispers died down, but the gazes of the passengers continued to be fixed on Victoria, who stood at the end of the cabin with a tense expression on her face. Isabella and Adam, though silent, kept their eyes on their colleague. Alice, sitting next to her sleeping daughter, kept her composure. Lily resting against her shoulder. Alice remained wary. She could feel the silent support of the passengers around her, which gave her the strength to act. At the end of the cabin, Victoria bent down to check the tray of supplies, but her hands trembled slightly. The anxiety in her heart grew stronger and stronger. The piercing stares of the passengers felt like flames burning away her usual confidence. Victoria knew that everyone was waiting for her to apologize, but her pride would not allow her to do so. "They're waiting," Adam said quietly. "Just apologize and let's get this over with." "I didn't do anything wrong," Victoria objected. "I have nothing to apologize for." Adam sighed. "You can't rely on your connections to get out of a situation forever. Sooner or later it's going to catch up with you." It struck her that despite everything that was happening, Alice's gaze remained calm and her face collected. "Raoul is here," she whispered to Lily. "Everything will be resolved." Lily looked up, still clinging tightly to her mother. "Mummy, she won't hurt me anymore, will she?" The girl's voice trembled. Alice leaned over and kissed her forehead. "No, darling, no one will ever hurt you again." Raoul entered the VIP cabin. His gaze traveled through the passengers before settling on Victoria. "Explain your behavior," he demanded. Victoria tried to keep her composure, but her voice gave her away. "Mr. Raoul, it was just a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to offend anyone," she began, but was interrupted. Raoul raised his hand. "A misunderstanding? I've heard enough from witnesses and passengers. You violated service protocols and hurt a child. This is unacceptable." Lewis, an elderly passenger, stepped forward, his face expressing indignation. "Mr. Raoul, I witnessed the incident. What Victoria did is unacceptable. We expect the airline to act decisively." "He's right," added a young woman named Rosa, standing next to Alice. "We are ready to testify. Alice and her daughter did not deserve to be treated like this." Victoria felt her blood run cold. She looked around but found no support. Adam and Isabella stood off to the side, their faces expressing disappointment. No one was on her side this time. Raoul turned to Alice, his expression softening. "Madame, I sincerely apologize for what happened. Such behavior does not reflect the values of our airline." Alice nodded slightly. "Thank you, but this isn't just about me. I hope your airline learns a lesson from this." Raoul froze. His eyes flashed with understanding. "You're, Alice Morgan? The owner of the investment group associated with our airline?" There was silence in the VIP cabin. Raoul's words sounded like a thunderclap. Victoria opened her eyes wide. "She's the owner?" Rose whispered. Alice met Raoul's gaze calmly. "Yes, but that's not my role here today. I'm just a mother protecting her daughter." Victoria felt her legs stop holding her up. She realized that now she had to face not only the scorn of the passengers, but also the wrath of the airline owner herself. All avenues of escape were cut off. Raoul turned to her. His voice turned icy. "Victoria, you are suspended immediately. We will launch an official investigation. You should prepare for the consequences." Victoria couldn't utter a word. Her former confidence crumbled. She lowered her head and left the cabin, leaving the judgmental looks of the passengers behind her. Alice gently lifted Lily into her arms and, passing Raoul, said, "Thank you for your swift action. I hope this serves as a lesson to the entire system." Raoul bowed slightly. "We'll make sure it doesn't happen again, Miss Alice." As Alice and her daughter were leaving the plane, Lily turned around and looked at Raoul. "Thank you for helping me and Mom," Lily said quietly. Raoul allowed himself a rare smile. "You are a brave girl. Always keep that smile." The passengers watched Alice walk away, admiring her calmness and strength. And Victoria was now all alone. In the staff room, the dim light could not dispel the heaviness in her soul. Muffled whispers of co-workers echoed behind her. The door swung open and Isabella walked in. Her face was cold. "Raoul is waiting for you in the executive office." Immediately, Victoria swallowed, trying to fight the panic. Her steps were heavy. There was a tense silence in the office. Raoul sat at his desk, several executives beside him. One of them had a file in his hands. Do you realize how serious your actions are? Raoul asked. You didn't just break the rules, you hit a child. Victoria raised her head, her eyes filling with tears. I didn't know. I didn't know who she was. Raoul slapped his hand on the table. Even if she wasn't the owner, you had no right to do that. It's not a matter of status. It's a question of morality. One of the executives opened a file. We've received over 20 formal complaints from passengers. Some are demanding refunds and public apologies. The damage is enormous, and you're responsible for it. Victoria trembled. I'll do anything, please, she begged. Raoul shook his head. You had a chance to make things right, but you didn't take responsibility. The decision is final. You're fired. Forever. Victoria gasped. I've worked here for 10 years. You're ruining my career over one mistake? No. Raoul's voice turned cold. You ruined it yourself. When Victoria left the office, she couldn't lift her head. Adam and Isabella were waiting for her at the exit. Isabella stepped forward. Sometimes admitting mistakes isn't weakness, it's the only way to keep respect, she said quietly. Victoria didn't answer anything. She simply walked away. In the weeks that followed, her life became chaos. No job, no support, no hope. Colleagues withdrew. Even Pilar, her ex-girlfriend, refused to meet. I'm sorry, Victoria. I can't get involved, she said over the phone and hung up. The weight of loneliness came over Victoria. She received a letter of cancellation of her contract. Her career vanished like smoke. Months passed. She wrote a letter of apology to Alice, but there was no reply. Years later, in a small cafe near the airport, Victoria saw Alice with Lily. They walked past without recognizing her. Victoria's breath caught. Alice had moved on, and she was in the past. And that was the hardest price she had to pay. This story is a reminder. Arrogance and recklessness can ruin everything. Sometimes a simple apology is enough to avoid disaster. Humility and empathy are more important than any status. If this story got you, put a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support inspires us to tell touching stories every day.